Today I'm going to talk in a strange way about DevSecOps. The title is Trust Me, We're Doing DevSecOps. And it will become clear much more when I talk. So bear with me if there is no immediate relationship. I trust I will make a point in the end. My name is Patrick Debois. I do first had a title, DevOps Relations. I found that it was really weird for me being the DevOps Relations. So I changed my title to making sure I have Dev, Love, Ops as a relation kind of title, because I think it's more appropriate than being the DevOps relation, whoever is the DevOps in this world. Been mentioned before, I did some DevOps and looking at my Twitter handle, you can see I started in 2008, and Twitter has been instrumental for me, spreading the notion of DevOps and learning what people do around DevOps. So feel free to follow me or to ping me on Twitter. That's probably the best channel to reach me out there. The thing that people always ask me, can you look into the future? What's next in DevOps? What do you want to do next? And they were already asking in 2013 when I was DevOps Days Austin. And at that time, I created this map from, if you look at the bottom, Agile, the cloud, and it grows up to, all these different IDs. And, it hasn't been updated, but team topologies, you can argue, is also one of them. And, all the SRE and all the things that it has inspired in the future. But it's always really hard, and I keep saying you can't predict the future, and I don't even say that, some people say you invented DevOps. That's not true. I always say it is a zeitgeist of people thinking similar thoughts, and I don't think it's a coincidence that at the same time, Facebook and all these social networks came around. It's letting go of the ultra directive way of working, like the big boss dictates all. It's like the social collaboration. So the collaboration across teams is something that, is in the same zeitgeist of doing things. It's now been 10 plus 1 years, and, I'm still working on it. I muted the Twitter handle DevOps because it's kind of hard for me to look at what it's become. But it doesn't mean that I still, I'm looking for the principles or what we're heading for. So one of the things, that kept me busy over the years, over the 10 years, is looking how this kind of start of an ID gets reduced somehow. Like Agile started out like a cool team collaboration, and then how we remember it is Scrum and TDD. And it's like whatever UID you have, whether it was ITIL, they had like good IDs, practices put in place, change procedures, but ITIL will be associated somehow with inventory and ticket systems and the change advisory board. Similarly, DevOps, continuous delivery, infrastructure as code. I was recently in a webinar with Jeff Barr, which some people might know, who blogs for Amazon. And he said so after DevOps became SRE, and then we have Cloud Ops, and it's the better DevOps. And it's like, wait a minute, what's happening here? And so I recently went online and I started seeing these articles, right? Can Agile and DevOps get along? And DevOps versus SRE. And it really makes me sad to see this, like the old versus new. And I know DevOps is kind of old in a way. It's 10 years old. So, we have a need for something new, and we tried it. It didn't work. And we kind of, have to find a new way or new thing that we can associate ourselves with. Similarly, I do agree that part of the success of something like DevOps or Agile or ITIL has been the technology association, because it gets people interested. It's like the immediate thing you can do. And, I love Andrew, who quoted, give me an API, give me that. And so anything about automation and technology is kind of a double-edged sword when we talk about DevOps. It helps, but then, if it becomes only that, because that's what people remember, that's what makes me sad. So A couple of years ago, I had like a similar dilemma for me while going to serverless. We were a small startup using more and more external services. And I thought to myself, is this the end of DevOps, right? Like we don't even have to sit together anymore, collaborate, or just use somebody else's service. Is this actually the API, give me API or give me that kind of evolution of the collaboration? And it took a while for me to realize that actually the communication is different. So an external service is still communicating with you. You know, the first thing Amazon learned about, you know, an outage is that they had to communicate somehow with you. They put like a status board on there. You could argue whether the green is actually green, but the fact that this is a way of communicating with you what somebody else is doing. Similarly, I found a service provider called Imagix who actually exposed their internal errors. That was the first time I saw like a provider like explaining to you that things weren't, you know, okay on their side, on the status board, but going further, what failed. I loved with Travis CI that I can just go in on their Slack and ask questions, so I didn't have to go to the ticketing system. Again, another way of communicating with people, even though they were outside the company and not like DevOps inside the company. It was just collaboration in a different form. And whether you're doing a postmortem, and you can argue again, where that's, you know, just a sales pitch that you're doing, how well you did, or how genuine you're doing it, much of them actually provide you insights and be more communicating. Oh, if I do this, I am able to overload the service provider. So you get a better understanding. And it's very similar to Dev and Ops collaborating, but just with people outside of your company. And so to me, it is just, again, DevOps. Somebody said the hardest bottleneck to solve is the bottleneck that is not under your control. So if a service provider, you're using them, you have no authority to talk to them. So, but it is still a collaboration to do. Every time I use a new service, I try to send to support the immediate feedback that I got from the service, whether that was good or bad. They usually love it. I've done it multiple times for Amazon services. I actually became friends with them just by giving feedback, honest feedback on new features. People really like that. And again, it shows you the human side of these things. Besides this difference in, you know, collaborating outside your company or through an API, which isn't just the API technology, it's much more of a human behind it. I also found that almost on the belief level, you have these techno-utopists that believe that technology is going to solve everything. I've had it happen a few times when I go into a company and the only thing they care about is like, what technology do we need to use? And I don't believe that it works that way. I am in adherence of what some would say the law of amplification. Like technology amplifies the human forces or whatever the human wants. If you don't want it or you don't agree with it or you want to do something else, technology will kind of amplify that what you want, whether that's the right thing or do or not to do. You know, technology is neutral in that way, but it is not neutral that it is probably someone's personal intention or group intention that technology amplifies. Somebody recently asked me the question, can you do DevOps without automation? And I know we have had the word CAMs or CLAMs or COMs for many years where the A stands for automation. And when I look back earlier, it is much more about the collaboration than it is per se about the automation or about the technology. And again, that can help, but I do believe you can do DevOps if certain parts, if certain things are too hard to automate, then it's still DevOps. You don't per se need to have a pipeline. We had services that were always new, always required some new thing for the client. And it was more about building the right thing and we did like manual testing the first time, because for us it was important to get the right thing and not to build it right in the beginning. So I would still consider that DevOps in a collaboration form. Fast forward till the beginning of this year when I joined SNCC, obviously you come in, and I didn't know it was a big thing. Again, I can't predict the future. I come into a Paris DevOps conference. All the booths had DevSecOps branded tools. It was all about the DevSecOps tooling. And again, we fought so hard over the many years that it's not about the tools. And the only kind of pitches I started hearing, and I might be different from your experiences, we have a tool for this, we have a tool for that. And traditionally, security thinking, within that space, it's much about like, you want to trust people, but actually they don't want you to trust anybody. You can't trust the internet, you can't trust, whoever, the library that you're using, and so on. And to me, it almost sounded like it's like the cops, right? They want to like test and verify and do this all the time and check things. And I'm not going to give a small example of, how we deal with trust on the internet, right? We're all familiar with TLS and trusting things. If we can do a very nice threat analysis on all the things that we don't trust, and, the key exchange and so on, and the certificates that get leaked, and whatever we've come up, whether the new cipher or the new algorithm, it's just never going to be secure. You have to, like, if you want to go super secure, you have to change stuff all the time. Sometimes we come up with solutions, the certificate revocation list, and then they don't get implemented because it's too hard to kind of verify that stuff. Let's Encrypt made it better. And it seems that instead of making this the perfect secure world, we started doing a mixture between making it secure enough and then showing transparency. Like the certificate transparency has been a shift there in a way that people can see who requests the certificate, like why are we doing this? And so it isn't that one authority that says, yeah, it's secure and we need to trust. Obviously, then the problem, because who do you trust? So we never end with the technology because we can't solve this problem in a good way. And you think SSL, it doesn't matter whether you're installing the Docker app, that there's no checksum, or you don't know how to verify the checksum, whether it's your SSL certificate that has expired, true story again. It's like whatever we do in technology, it will just not be happening. And sometimes it's a funny thing, like NPM just showing you advertising while they could have installed the world on your laptop. But we trust them. We trust the internet. We do these things. I'm not saying we trust them completely. We trust them enough, right? And it gets amplified if you're in another country with a different kind of policy. Or in China, checksums mean nothing. You rely on other months' checksums. And so the bottom line is like, even curl install pipe, we do these things, right? Do we trust the internet really? And we do it, we still do it. Whether that's your credentials, again, technology is not stopping us from submitting these things. So I just want to make the point that technology will help us in a way, protect us, but it will never be complete. And there is a cost that we are doing, like verifying everything that comes on the internet, whether that's your hardware, whether that's everything that is from packages. At a certain point, we have to kind of let go and go for a trust position because we can't keep up. And that, similar to what John Cuttlefish said, if you have to constantly have meetings in your company to figure out whether you're doing the right thing, that is so costly. At some point, you have to trust the humans to do something. And it's even worse in security because can you say something is secure if you don't know the evidence, you don't see anything happening, right? If you're not like monitoring, or it's beyond your monitoring, or even if it's in between your monitoring cycles, You can't never be sure. The way Margaret Burgess says it, you cannot make promises on behalf of other people. So you just can't say something like, the system is secure. You can say things like, we run these checks, we did this, but you can never say they are secure. And what I want to say with that is that a lot of it is in your pipelines is building confidence. Today this worked, tomorrow it will probably work too. Does that mean it's secure? No way. This is not a guarantee. And again, I also see sometimes pipelines used not in a way to support people who do deployments, but as a way to kind of, I'm not going to say block, but some people don't trust the other group, so they build like a lot of checks, and then they hope with these checks that people are not doing the things that they don't want them to do, because they might think that people are stupid, but in essence, you're not building finally trust in there. And I know it's a subtle difference. Like confidence is just something you can do repeatedly, and it has a historical record. Trust is something on a totally different level. It is on the human side, and it does not have to have a confidence of something that happens all the time. It has different signs of looking at trust. And it has been taken to another level, whether you trust your pipeline or the things that you do in your pipeline, and whether you trust your pipeline itself. The securing your pipeline itself, and where does it end? It never ends. Something that clearly illustrates is a project like Volkswagen, who actually makes the tests run in your CI, regardless whether they actually test or the test pass or not. This is just an indication of whatever you're looking at is anecdotal advice. The way John Oswald explains it with a little experiment, he says, when we have all these technical systems in place, and we have, how long can you go without touching your systems until something happens? If I would ask you, an hour, you say, yeah, of course, we got everything in place. A day, a week. So we can't take the humans out of the equation for anything of the system. The humans kind of guide the technology and amplify what they want to do, but you cannot reason one besides the other. And that whole pipeline that I've seen build up over time, which is a good way of doing things, has also reached a level of complexity where the pipeline itself is starting to become a legacy system that you need to keep up and work on things that are need to be done. And so you can ask yourself, the system that is completely defined with like a million checks, will that code better when something fails compared to a loosely system with a lot of guidance to the people when things fail? We can work on to that. So the ironies of automation is that the more you automate, the harder it becomes to operate, because you have less experience, the machine is taking over a lot of time, and you get less rehearsal. So you need maybe after a while to do the chaos testing way more. So whatever we do to automate it, it's kind of an irony, because you have to change that. Whether that's the exceptions or whatever we want to do, there is an irony that automation works after a while against you in doing stuff. And again, a great example is that we relied on a lot of testing initially, but I think a modern pipeline is just sprinkled with a lot of human interaction. And it's nice to see that the more we automate, that we can deal with the exceptions, and that there's more discussion and human interaction happening over time, every time. And that is also what makes it separation of duty so strange for people who think only in tools, because there's a lot of things that the tools will not solve for you in the pipeline. So coming back to the whole theme, kind of technology and coming back and security and verifying, I think the crux of DevSecOps is, in a way, yes, you can do some tooling and get some things in place, and I'm not arguing against it, but what you should be using them for is to build the trust, and you can't really best build the trust in the system because that's just confidence. So the more you can train people, the better you get at the trust. And I found this little model in a book called The Tin Book of Trust, and they talk the 4 pillars for them about trust is sincerity. That's more like, do you walk the walk that you think you should be doing? Reliability is that when you do something, does it have the outcome that you expect it to have? The competence is about how competent are you knowledgeable of doing this work? And then you can be sincere, reliable, and competent and still not care, because you can walk the walk quite easily, deliver it all the time. I make a test pass, I don't care. So it is still very much about the care and the trust. And that's, interviewing people around in the DevSecOps, you first get like the first 50 minutes you get about like, yes, we need more tools and better tools and we developer first and, all these kind of mantras. But then what they really want is, we want to be able to trust the other group. And they want to make security a shared thing. And that's all nice. But let's say, again, we look at an open source library through the lens of these 4 things. When you check out a new library or that you want to use, obviously there's a couple of technology things. Like, does it have tests? Does it have like technical documentation? What's the number of open issues? Clearly, we can educate people and make them become better at all these topics. And competence is something that is really strong if in a technology, because that's, for a lot of people, that is at their core. Are you competent in something or not? And it's one of the major evaluations of a library, but it's not the only one. So if you want to see whether it's reliable, we look at different things. Like, is it still committing? Is it still releasing? Is it doing it on a regular cadence? How many people have used this? And indirectly, we're looking at like, if there's a lot of people using it, it must be reliable, because we can't believe it's not reliable that people are using it. But obviously, right, like while doing the research a while ago, I was looking like, can you actually buy GitHub forks and stars? Yes, there was a shop. Okay, they closed it down. So no matter for you to try it, but these things exist. So would we have spotted that? Probably not. And we can go further, right? Is the project sincere? Does it have like governance in place, a code of conduct, and all these things that we kind of expect, like doing the walk from, being a good library. And yes, it does, but other people look at the care, like the number of open pull requests. You can argue whether, that's an indicator of something that shows a vibrant community. But if they stay open too long, maybe the people submitting, the people closing them or like wanting to pull them in, they don't care about the pull requests. They just want to scratch their own itch. And that's perfectly fine. And it's the same thing with an external service. If they don't like care about you or your use case, you have to live with it and you have to go with something else. And they're all indicators and they're not technical, right? So this is the care package. So whenever you're dealing either with a library or as shown with an external service or with your internal people, you can look through the lens of trust to kind of see which one needs to be addressed. And so if security says, I want developer, 2, and then it comes, I want them to be sincere, but they should actually be there, right? At the time, and we can teach them how to do better practices in security without a problem. So you definitely should educate your people. And for example, making it more reliable is that whenever they release something, you make it part of the definition of done. And we hope by that we make them security a shared responsibility. But note again, the developers can do the top two and then competence without even caring. So it isn't that easy as just saying we're going to go do all these practices and we can trust the people or we can trust our pipeline, because making it people care is something totally different. And on the same time, developers want security to be considerate of non-security features. Like if something goes out, they still want to make security people understand that there's more things than just security alone. So if you show that consideration as a security person, then you will win in sincerity. When you are there every time a new story is reviewed, right? That ties into being reliable. You will be there at the end of the sprint, at the beginning. If you're just popping in randomly to rant to them that it's not secure, that's not really helpful. So security people can make themselves more reliable, and they can help in the competence of explaining a security issue and not just saying, it's not secure, I'll do it myself. You don't understand that. And that's, all these things together and then making it shared responsibility. But it's not just, it should be a shared responsibility with all the others. You will not achieve the trust level. A great example is something that was happening at Etsy, where they normally had a very important config file that they, when that needed changing, it would require 5 managers or people to approve that change. And they changed the policy in a way that it was non-blocking. They said, when an engineer touched the file, he would say, hey, you're touching this file. We assume you know what you're doing. That's your job. But be aware, when you change this file, it will still go out to these 5 people just for information. And it's a mindset change of just blocking everything and then starting to trust your people. Again, they might need to be educated in competence, in their sincerity, their reliability. But in the end, you want people that you can trust using your system and not only rely on your technology there as well. So I think security in DevSecOps is not a binary, like let's go into the tools like I shown with the library. It's a much more complex problem, and it's a technology and a human problem that we need to do that to solve there. One kind of thing that isn't very helpful is that we always think of the other person of being less trustworthy than ourselves. So we do have to overcome this mental blocker. Of course, they don't have your competence. Of course, they don't have the same things. But we need to understand, not just saying they're less trustworthy, but how can we make them more trustworthy? But on the flip side, we are also very good at thinking that we are the best person that somebody can trust. And that is because we trust ourselves, or we judge ourselves by our intentions and not by our behavior. So if DevSec and Ops want to collaborate, they not only have to think about what the others should do, you should also think about what you can bring to the table and how you can help the other people. And it is not only by raising competence, it's by being sincere, by being reliable, and caring about their problems themselves too. It's slow. I've never seen shortcuts that can kind of make it faster. And it is also changing over time. Trust today might not be the trust that you have tomorrow. So you have to be aware of that. I understand that this is not like the exact advice, but my main point is to show you that DevSecOps is not the problem of putting some tools in place. It is about who uses the tools, and how you can create that trust over there. So become more trustworthy. Make sure that that is something you can do yourself to the others. And it's the small things that can go a long way in that. There is an iron law somewhere that explains that whatever system you put in place, when you look at the more construct or the more impact you want to have, once you start measuring at a larger scale, it actually doesn't have an impact. I tend to disagree with it, but it also shows that whatever solution A has come up, let's say, the Spotify model is transported to another company, it's not that easy because the people are different, the mechanics are different, the history is different, so you have to be aware of whatever you do. And to close off, I want to say that the first step of the transformation is the individual. And it might be the individual looking at change that wants to leverage certain tools. It's the individual that we want to address, and not by just throwing some tools at them in the hope that they pick it up. I mentioned already the Thin Book of Trust, so it's a good reading. I highly recommend a new book that came out, Agile Conversations. I think it's the first book that focuses on building trust over conversations at the individual level. So I highly encourage you to do the exercises, read the book, as it will make you better at expressing what you want. And in that openness and that transparency allows you to gain more trust. It will not solve if you have conflicting ideas. It will not solve if you don't trust each other in a way that, if you have different belief systems, but it can get a long way of getting more empathy while, listening to the words you say and changing the way you say them. That makes you more trustworthy and sincere while explaining things as well. I appreciate you waiting for me doing this explanation. And I know this is not, the step 1 to 3 presentation, but I hope I made you think about whatever you can improve at your company, how you maybe reflect on yourself, how to become more trustworthy, and how that will help your DevSecOps or DevOps initiative at your company. Thank you very much, and I hope we have many questions after this.
Thank you, Patrick. That was great. Thanks to you and to everyone for bearing with the little hiccups we had. Definitely learning experience for us organizers. So there's one question in the chat from Vitor Pereira. Meanwhile, remember you can post in the chat, or you can click in participants in your Zoom client, click participants, and then click raise hand if you want to talk and speak out your question. So Vitor Pereira is asking, from the example, the tool that says that changing the sensitivity security file will inform other people states the reason for that, correct? Without that, doesn't seem sincere, just scary.
Yes, so it does state it. You can watch the video, it's online. It clearly states it. It's not something that goes automatically, but again, it shows you information, but not necessary. If you know what you're doing, you're still trusting your people to do the right thing. And I think that's the strongest signal it's also sending to the people who would otherwise would be feeling blocked by the system. And I think they learned the hard way that by doing it that way, if it's at night and they have to wait for a couple of hours for everybody to sign off, they would have lost a lot of money because that one engineer could have solved it but at that time. So.
Cool. I have one question while people think about their questions. In this DevSecOps kind of new journey for you, what did you find that was more surprising compared to kind of your experience in the DevOps community? So that's kind of the first question. And then the follow-up question is, in general, what are the main differences you found between the two communities, or you find that they're very similar? How has your experience been?
I think it's just the same problems phrased differently. So I haven't really, like, the one differentiator I find is that if development has to bring out features, that's clearly measurable. Did you release the feature or not? If ops needs to deliver an uptime, we kind of can measure that. But if you would want to measure, is it secure? Like, all bets are off, right? It's not exactly measurable because it's a risk, and it's also harder to prioritize against more exact. In the beginning, ops had the same problem quantifying the value it would bring to the table by operating better. I think those got explained and measurable over time. I think security still has to go through that phase of making security or the work they do more measurable, because we can't really say how much we've done in security. So I think for me, that was the differentiator in the narrative. And I don't think we will be ever to close that gap because risk will keep existing and so on. And people ask me, quite often, DevSecOps, DevOps, should we have like another name? I think it merits to have a new name because it's probably a new set of stories that will be brought out. If DevOps would have been 1 or 2 years old, it wouldn't have mattered because that would just be part of that narrative. But over 10 years, the public has kind of formed their idea that DevOps is about the build automation and it's about deployment, and it's less about security, even though we've been discussing security in DevOps for as early as possible. I do think it's never been seen as something special, but in my phrase, the value of DevOps has been that it's a label where stories came out about dev and ops collaborating. And I see the same thing now with DevSec and ops collaborating, which are the stories that, we use that label to find those stories. And yes, they're abused by, marketing and other motives. But still, at current date, it's the best label we can have to find them. So,
cool. Thank you. So we have a few questions. Let's start with Sergio Morin. Sergio, if you can unmute and ask.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. You mentioned in the presentation, you quoted, the more you automate, the harder is to operate. Or the more complex the automation is, the harder it is to operate. And yet, during the talk, the speech that you have, and don't get me wrong, seems like the best system or the most secure system is the one that doesn't exist. So since you are having the SEC now in the DevSecOps, are you trying to not to automate things, not to put things in a kind of automated way so that the system stays as it is, so it is more secure?
I understand the confusion, and it is not have been my attention. I think in both, I wanted to show that there's a level up until you can do automation. And at a certain level, it becomes too costly. And I've seen many CI/CD initiatives where it seems like the only goal is about automating the pipelines. And I would argue is that after a certain level of automation, the bottleneck you're trying to solve can be outside of that pipeline. And it makes sense to know when it's been enough and not just to keep continuing the automation. Does that answer your question?
Okay, cool. Thanks. But your comment was about the CI/CD part, not about the system as a whole.
Yes.
Okay. Cool.
Maybe I can just say this in general as a remark as well. I am not a polarizing person, right? So whatever goes left has to go right. For example, I struggle with the word developer first because it almost makes people feel that it is only about the developers, where I also know it's about like operators. Like, and that's always what I try to balance. It's like, it's not one thing you need to look at, but let's go on to the next question.
Urban Freitas, can you ask your question?
So, speaking about, firstly, thank you, Patrick, a lot for being here. The question is all about this balance. That's, as we know, in Karma, wherever in the world, the balance is the more difficult part to reach. So, if you have to take a decision regarding how much should we invest, or not a decision, what is your rationale, the way that you think when you approach this security in terms of investment? How much should we invest so it's plausible, the return is enough? You explained that the rationale about we have to accept that we don't know everything and we cannot control everything. And I agree with that. But regarding if you have to take a financial decision, so I will invest on this DevSecOps journey, how much should I invest?
So there's definitely no clear answer to that because the risk is probably different for each company, whatever they want to do, right? I think what a lot of people say is that they often talk about the 1, 10, 100 kind of style, like 100 developers, 10 operators, and like 1 security person in that context. I think I often see security as a maturity in DevOps, and let me explain that many times the first value that people get is by pushing something out, and then when it becomes more popular, then they start to worry more about security. I'm not saying this is, in a bank, security is built in from the start. So, but both kind of companies will have a different dynamic. What I've seen is just, and I don't think there's an exact thing, but the guideline most people put forward is 80-20%. But it's the same thing whether that's in your company. For your security, are you going to spend 80% on the vulnerabilities that are like known, and then leave 20% to spend on your time on the things that you don't know? Again, it varies because you cannot see the effort away from the risk or the impact it will have on your system. I wish I could give you the number 42 and that is like, solved. But again, that would just be an oversimplification. And sometimes, if I go to a bank and they would tell me that I'm not secure, and then I would use PayPal as a system which inherently seems less secure, or Visa seems less secure because I just have a card and a number, right? If the whole concept around it can make up for the risk that you're doing it in a different way, like the effort of spending it like the most secure payment system ever might not be the effort. So there is different ways to solving the balance between having the security or not. And I think that is, again, one of the troubles that I mentioned before, is the quantifying which value security brings. If you would not do anything that makes your system secure and nothing happens, you have saved a lot of money. If you have a breach and you have not done anything, you would lose a lot of money if you didn't prepare for it. And that is something that depends on your system, how much of the risk, how much of the business risk you want to take in that level. And I don't think that's a clear number. If it was, it probably would have been surfaced right now on what the number is in any of that. So I apologize, I don't have the answer to your exact question. But I do also want to give the example of another experience I had. I worked at a startup, and we were measuring the bottleneck and the CI pipeline and tried to make it faster. But as a business owner, I saw that the bottleneck was not in the technology. It was maybe first in the marketing, then it became into the sales, and then it was actually that we didn't have the right product for the right people and that we can make it cheap enough. So I always go for like, what's my next bottleneck? And if I can solve this in a way that is proportionate to what the time that I'm spending on, I have to weigh like my value that I get from that versus what I'd be doing. And that continuous process, I think is the business process we should all be considerate about. And it's not just the technology problem saying, you know, how much time, you know, on our backlog will deal with security issues. I'm sorry, Urbano, for not being that clear, but it's the honest answer, I guess.
That's always better. We have a number of questions in the chat. I don't know how you're, if you're okay with a few more questions, Patrick.
Good, go for it.
Good. So Manuel Rodriguez is asking, are trust and collaboration the same in large organizations and startups? What do you think?
I struggled with that as well. The phrase that stuck with me is the more interactions you have during a party doesn't make it a better party. So if you would sit and collaborate, and you would mean collaborate by just sitting together and not aligning or not trusting each other, you can definitely like collaborate. If you want to succeed at the effect of your collaboration, you'll probably be helpful that you trust each other, so you don't have to verify all the time what the other is doing, that you're amplifying your both from working together. But in essence, collaborating in a means that is just like interacting, you can do that without being sincere, and you can do that without being caring, like I showed in my diagram. But whether that you consider that real collaboration, you know, that's a question for the person who defines collaboration in there. So.
Another question from Ketan Derouge. In your opinion, does remote distributed working have a positive, negative, or no impact on trust? Many people miss the eye to eye when building a relationship, right?
It's a very timely question now, you know, everybody working remote. So my take on it is that I've been working for, I had my own open source projects for a while, and you actually are able to trust another person as much as a person sitting next to you. But you look at different cues, you look at how they write things, how they respond to you, very similar to what I described to your library, to the library that you're evaluating. They're all subtle cues that might make you trust that person. I do believe that the transfer of, not per se knowledge, but kind of we get more, we can read more sensors in a way, if that's the way I put it. If you're sitting next to somebody, you can probably be more, have more visible cues or what that person is doing, of seeing it the whole time. If you're sitting in the office, see how he reacts, or how that gives you like a better feeling. But I do think that we can perfectly get to trust by being remote and online only. And maybe, I don't think the speed actually even makes that much of a difference. But like in any good relationship, you have to work with each other to understand whether you're having trust or it's just, charade that you're doing amongst each other. And I've seen many charades in companies as well, sitting next to each other. So I don't think that's the the differentiator there.
By the way, Lisa Crispin said she had to drop off, but it was a wonderful talk. We have a question from Miguel David. Do you think the next stage is more likely a shift left, adding security knowledge to development work, or more to increase communication while keeping the expertise of security with the people who have it already?
So I know this is maybe a bit different from how people define shift left. I kind of came late to the DevSecOps party, so the narrative was already done in that way. For me, shift left, in my mind, is in translation in a way that A, we fix things early in the value stream. And I don't believe anymore in the distinction of person A is a developer, person B is an operations person. We're all doing the task these kind of silos used to do, but that means we're all, now developing, and developing is fixing things early in the value stream. And then the second part where I think that is helpful is that much like DevOps was different from traditional ops in a way, it was not per se that they couldn't do automation before. I think that what changed is the self-serving, and it wasn't just the self-serving, it's you want to have people to do their jobs and to fix the problems, in a certain autonomy. Autonomous teams, they decide, the developer can decide. He has ability to fix a problem as well. So part of this process of DevSecOps and, kind of moving things in development is also empowering the developer to be able to fix problems themselves in a self-servicing way that they in the past weren't able to do because it was more seen in the production where they didn't have access. Again, the roles are shifting and the tasks are shifting, but that's how I look to shift left as a movement, or the expressing of these two kind of more global values that we try to pursue.
I have a question from Rafael Ribeiro. I'm in the process of implementing DevOps for embedded development in my company. Any suggestions to deal with this kind of development pipelines? Usually people talk and blog about web apps, CLI apps. What about embedded software? Any tips?
So I'm an electrical engineer by trade. And at that time, I know that we already used a lot of the virtualization, even in embedding system, to try to simulate the system. We might not consider this, the end-to-end test with the final product, which is probably harder in manufacturing because it takes time, the assembly takes time. But I've seen people take the approach of the more we can virtualize, and I've seen it happen with Cisco routers, that more and more became software. And yes, there's hardware underneath, but the more they can kind of put things in software or emulate that, the closer they get to maybe what we consider web speed. In 2008, I was doing a project, moving a data center. And moving a data center at that time was, moving a lot of hardware. And I will never forget the example, what we did. If you look at how can we get feedback? And they were saying, well, we have to first wait for all the switches to arrive in the data center because before we can set up a connection. And I said no, that's not the only way. Just buy 2 long cables and connect system A to B, right? And that is just an example of rethinking how you can get fast feedback in that system and not making it the overblown, we have to have the whole pipeline in the exact. Look how you can have different ways of getting feedback. And I think I'm not well versed in the embedded system, but I'm sure there systems and virtualization will go along in that world.
So another question from Vitor Pereira. What do you think about the possibility of doing formal validation for security purposes? Since now we have cloud functions like AWS Lambda, that could be a huge signal for trust.
Yeah, so I was one of the first Lambda adopters. And again, you think of it as an abstraction layer. But in reality, it is a leaky abstraction layer. So we whenever we use a service, we kind of think of this like blank slate that we're doing things. I don't think we can completely formalize the security, because whatever we're doing it at, we're going to have like insecurity at the next level. We're at the next level. Like the abstraction will just push, either complexity goes down, but I still see people deploying insecure Lambda functions as well. They, you know, whatever code you write, they're still susceptible for problems. So it sounds to me like the times from 4GL where we thought like we could kind of, you know, solve the database query problem by using an intermediate language. But I don't think I believe in it. But, you know, convince me otherwise, I would say. If that's one less things we need to worry about, I'm good with it. So.
Okay, I think we have a last question in the chat from Diogo. Is there any place where we can read about where is the bottleneck or finding the bottleneck that you mentioned earlier?
I think that works come more to, no, the canonical book about that would be The Goal, right, from Elliot Goldratt, that looks at manufacturing of kind of dealing with the bottleneck. And then the other thing I can offer there is that I did a talk in DevOps Days Ghent where I explained my reasoning to go through the bottlenecks of my own company and see that it wasn't just in technology as well. So maybe that helps us two resources to look at those perspectives.
Perhaps even the Phoenix project, which is effectively
yes, yeah.
following the goal, but you know, in a more of modern approach. But both are very good at identifying why, you know, if you don't address the bottleneck, then you're not really speeding up the whole system. I want to thank Patrick again for all his time and willing to participate here.
Thank you very much.